Hey fellas, in this video, I'm going to show you how to reload 9mm, quick, easy, and cheap. Alright, for the first step, I choose to tumble my brass to knock off any of the dirty particulates that are on the cases. Some people choose to resize their brass before tumbling. I choose not to because I don't want the corn media stuck in the primer pockets. So for the first step, I'm going to tumble my brass in my Lyman's Turbo Tumbler. I use the Lyman's treated corn media. You don't have to use treated media. I choose to use treated media. It makes it a little bit more shiny, but it's not necessary. And then I also use the Lyman brass media separator and a 5-gallon pail. All right, so when you're using your corn tumble media, you obviously want to take off the lids. I fill this about halfway full. Other people will tell you a third or 3/4. I usually do about a half. There's no real science behind it. After I fill this with half of the corn media, then I take my brass and fill it. Now with some tumblers, they will have a specific amount of cases that you can actually tumble at a time, so please refer back to your manual when doing so. All right, I typically tumble my brass for about 2 hours. You can do it longer if your brass is dirtier, you want it more shiny, but typically 2 hours just to knock off that particulate. All right, after about 2 hours, our brass should be clean. So I dump that into the Lyman's brass media separator. And there you go. All right, for this reloading project, I'm going to use the RCBS 3-die carbide 9mm set. The nice thing about RCBS, I'm not sure about others, but they will let you know what shell holder to use at the bottom of the box here. There'll be 3 different dies that you use. The first one will be the Depriming Resizing die. The second one will be the Expander die that will provide a bell for the opening of your case so the bullet can seat into the shell. And the third one is the seating die. It has 2 different pushers. One's for flat nose and one's for a round nose. So use the appropriate one when using the different types of bullets. The next step is to place the appropriate shell holder into the ram and raise the ram to the top of the stroke. You should meet resistance at the bottom. Take your resizing die, screw it into your press until you hit the shell holder. Once you do, set and lock your retaining nut. Now you're ready to resize and deprime. One thing to note is the expander decap assembly should protrude through the bottom of the die 4/10 of an inch. You can adjust it by loosening the nut and screwing the rod down or up to make that measurement accurate. Next, you'll take your polished brass, place it in the shell holder, run the ram all the way to the top, and now you have a fully resized and deprimed shell. The next step is to find out your trim case length. I'm using the Hornaday Handbook of Cartridge Reloading. It's the 10th edition. You can see it's mildly worn from all of the reloading that I do. So going to the 9mm Luger, I'm going to look for the case trim length, and that is 0.749 inches. So I take my resized and deprimed brass and make sure that it's within that limit. That's how I know. I don't need to trim this brass because it hasn't stretched through the resizing process. Now that the case has been resized and deprime, the only other thing besides the trim length that I look at is the flash hole and the pocket, primer pocket. I want to make sure that the flash hole is open wide, and I want the pocket, primer pocket, to be clean. I use the RCBS station. I clean out the flash hole and the primer pocket. And now it's ready to be expanded. The next step is to use the expanding die. This is really important. By using the expanding die, it produces a bell on the case, so the actual bullet will seat into the case. You can see right now there's no bell on the case, so the bullet will not fit. It won't seat in the case. The expander die. In order to get this set, you'll want to raise the ram all the way up to the top. Place your die into the press and screw it down. The instructions say to place it right above the shell holder. So I've screwed it down to the shell holder, and now I'm going to back it up just a little bit. Now I'm going to set my locking ring. For this project, I'm using a 115 grain 9mm round nose bullet. I have this set appropriately, so I'm going to place the shell into the shell holder, run the ram up to the top, and now I've created a bell at the top of the case where the bullet will seat and not fall out. To prime your ammunition, you have several different options. One is located on the press. I'm not even going to show you that. I never use it. It's really hard to put the primers in that primer pocket, and with my thick fingers it just doesn't work. With my Rock Chucker Supreme, it came with a hand loader, and I'll show you how to use that. So the first step you'll want to do is you'll want to unscrew here, take this out, make sure the bolt drops inside there. You'll want to take the same shell holder that you were using on the press, place it in here. And this gets a little bit tricky when you try and put it back together. I apologize now. Hopefully this will go together the first time and work for me. And this is another reason why I don't use this one very often, is pretty arduous to try to align and manipulate. All right, I got that put back together. Now I'm function testing it, making sure that you can see the rod that comes up, and that'll press the primer into the shell casing. Then we put this back in. Screw that all the way in. Some frustrations is obviously assembly of this. This screw will sometimes back out and it'll fall apart. And I've noticed that some shell holders, whether they're RCBS, I think it's for the 223556, they're sloppy in here, so you have to maybe adjust for that as well. Then what you want to do is you want to take your primer holder, add your primers, make sure that they're all facing in the same direction, which they'll all be facing red up. And you'll put the cap on top. Another frustration I have with this setup is that this gets really loose and it falls off, and then you have primers all over the floor. So I use a couple of clip holders put them on there to keep that in place. You don't have to do this, but for me, I get frustrated pretty easy when my primers are all over the floor. You put it into place there. And then you simply take your shell. Well, first, always make sure that they seat properly. You should be able to see in there the primer. You should be able to see the red. So I know it's in there, and I can actually move it up so I can see it even better. And then I take my shell, put it in, squeeze. Now you have a fully primed shell. Now, for the Lee Auto Bench Prime, I've taken this apart. There's two different systems here. One's for small primers. It says SM. You'll want to make sure that you get the small. Place that in. This one for me has a lot less frustration built into it. It still has a few. This is one of them. So when you're putting this in, you'll want to pull with your thumb, push up with your hand to slide in the appropriate shell holder. Function test, make sure the rod is coming through. Add your primers. Make sure they're all facing in the right direction. Close this. Make sure it's on lock, otherwise when you tip it up, see, this is one of the frustrations I have with this. Sometimes they allow them to fall out. That's what happens. So I put it into the machine, and then I move it to the on position. I make sure that the primers go down into the feed system, and now I can see that the primer, I'm not showing you from this direction that you can actually see it, but I can. And then I take an empty shell, I place it into the shell holder, press down, and now I have a prime shell. So because I'm using a 115 grain full metal jacket round nose, I have an 8-pound keg of tight group, so I'm going to use the tight group. Normally what people tell you to do is start off with the lowest, but I've been doing this for years. I know my recipe. I'm not going to give you my recipe because I don't want to take liability for it. I'm just going to go middle of the road, 3.9 grains. I'm not going to go high. I'm not going to go extremely low. I'm just going to go mid-road at 3.9 grains of tight group. Now that we know that we're going to use 3.9 grains of tight group, I need to measure it out with my powder thrower. Now the dial on the powder thrower, it's semi-accurate, but I don't trust it, so I use an electronic scale. The Lyman electronic scale I use to reference all of my grains and as a double check. So first off, I have to zero out my scale. Right now it's zeroed at 0 grains, but I need to put the powder holder on it, and that should show 122-ish grains. So I hit 0. Now I know that it's zeroed out. Now what I'll do is I'll take this, I'll throw a charge into the powder holder, and I'll see how close I am to the 3.9 grains, which I'm pretty close. I'm at 4.2. So I dial this in just a smidge. Check it again. And we're at 3.9, 3.8. It's okay if you fluctuate 0.1, especially in this charge. So I'm going to set it right there, knowing that we're mid-range with our powder charge. I'm going to lock the locking nut. I'm going to try it one more time. Trust, then confirm. And you can see we're bouncing back between 3.7. Could just dial this out just a smidge. I want to to try and get to 3.9 as close as possible. Now we went over, so I'm going to dial it in just a little bit. And again, if you're off by 0.1, especially for plinking rounds, it's not going to make a hill of beans. And there we are, we're at 3.9. Now that we know that our powder thrower is going to give us 3.9 grains per throw, you take your shell that's been primed, feed it into the bottom of the thrower, up, down, and double check to make sure that you have powder in here. You don't want a squib load. For bullet seating and crimping die, place the die into the press. Place a sized, primed, and powdered charge case into the shell holder and run it to the top of the press stroke. Screw the seeder die into the press until you feel it touch the mouth of the case. This will be the roll crimp shoulder in the body of the die contacting the case mouth. Once that's set, back the die away from the case mouth one full turn and temporarily set your locking ring. Unscrew the seat plug several turns. Lower the case and insert bullet into case mouth. Once you place the bullet into the case mouth, run the ram back all the way up, and then you will slowly turn the seat plug down, and you'll continuously make adjustments doing that same technique until you get the proper depth of the bullet into the case. Now that your case has been primed and powder charged, you'll put the bullet into the case, put it into the shell holder. You have the seating die in place, so you run the ram all the way up to the top. Now the last thing you need to do is check the overall measurement. Then, referring back to the manual, you want to take a look at what's called C.O.L. That's cartridge overall length. Some people say case overall length. That's inappropriate. That would just be the measurement of the case itself. This is cartridge overall length, which means top to bottom, it should be 1.1 inches. So taking my caliper, you can see that it's 1.1 inches. Hey guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Till next time.